how do lions hunt? How do researchers track these amazing animals to study different hunting strategies? In this episode, biologists Dr. Natalia Borrego and Dr. Genevieve Finerty introduce us to their research on the spatial ecology of lions. Welcome to In the Swarm. Today's episode is extra special because we're doubly blessed with two of our very own lion specialists. Welcome, Jen and Natalia.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jen.
Hi, I'm Natalia. Maybe just a bit of background about us and what we do. We research lions. My background is mainly lion behavior and cognition. So I study what they do and how they do it in the wild. And I mainly ask questions about their social behavior and what that means for how they're successful.
My background's a little bit different. I mostly work in spatial ecology, which basically means where animals go and what they do when they're there. I've spent most of the last 6 years putting trackers on various big cats, sometimes leopards, sometimes lions, to see where they go. Yeah, and now I'm taking a slightly different perspective at looking who they go places with.
Super cool. So thank you so much for being here today. How did you two meet and how did you form this incredible combo duo?
Well, it's actually just another case of it's a very small world in conservation science where, I think both of us had different almost ideas of how we met, because I was at a Christmas dinner actually with one of Natalia's ex-bosses and I was talking about my research and he said, "Oh, that's so weird. I have another postdoc who's interested in really similar stuff. You guys should connect." And in the meantime, little did I know Natalia was actually living with someone who had run the project that I was working on, but 10 years before.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So he said to me, I was living in South Africa at the time, he said, "Oh, there's this project that I think would be really great for the research questions you're interested in." At the time, I was really interested in how lions hunt, what kind of decisions they make when they're hunting, and what does that look like. And so I contacted Jen, who's doing her PhD. I was then up at her site working on the lion hunting project. And then from there, we got to chatting and realized our research interests overlapped. The big questions that we ask about kind of why are lions social and what does that mean for them?
And we developed a project together looking at how lions spend energy. And we used some of Natalia. My focus is mostly in wild populations, so animals that are unmanaged and in national parks. But that's great for some questions and terrible for other questions. And Natalia had a lot of contacts in captive facilities, I guess. So
So captive, but not the way you would think of as a traditional zoo. So in South Africa, you have really large areas that the lions are kept in. So it's not quite a zoo, but it's not quite wild. But you can access them the same way you would be able to access a zoo animal.
Yeah, so we went there and we spent 6 weeks collecting samples from some slightly unwilling, some more willing than other participants. And I think we can talk more about that later.
Yeah.
It was an interesting endeavor. And then we saw that there was a grant up at the Max Planck Institute for collaborative research grants, which would fund kind of teams of postdocs as opposed to individual salary. And we'd really known we wanted to work together, but we're really struggling to find funding to do it in a way that meant that both of us were getting the credit and the support we needed. So that was really exciting. And then we ended up here.
Here we are.
Your latest project, it's about why lions are social, right? Tell us more about that, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big question is, well, lions are social, which is one of the really fascinating, cool things about them. But it opens up all of these questions about why form groups in the first place, how do you form these groups, and when do you form these groups, and then how do you cooperate when you are together? I don't know, Jen, if you want to...
No, I mean, I think that covers it pretty well. So that's what our big grant that we were brought in on was looking at when they form groups and what drives this. And then I think for this project, we're kind of zooming in on when they are together, what activities are they doing, and to what extent do they work together actively, and if they do, when do they do it and when do they not? So we're kind of bringing in a whole new level of decision making to our research, trying to understand both from a long-term perspective, why would this evolve in this species, but also short-term, you have a decision to work with someone or not. And, what are the key factors that help lions make those decisions?
And when is it beneficial to work together versus when might it be better to just be alone and do your own thing? So these are all the kinds of questions that we're trying to get at. We've just started on this project, so we're really excited to see what happens.
Yeah, I'm also excited. I think for most lay people, they think, okay, lions, they exist in the pride, full stop, from documentaries and things like that. I think that's kind of the basic idea that people have when it comes to lions and how they are grouped together. But I think more and more, as I've spoken to like different researchers, there's this idea of the fission fusion. Can you explain to us a little bit about that, how this all works together in this group dynamic?
Sure. So with lions, you have a bunch of female lions who broadly live together and share space. And this is defended to some extent from other groups of female lions. And this is the unit that we generally think of as the pride. And then when we talk about fission fusion, what we mean by that is that you're not always spending time with all members of the group. You might split up into subunits and you might go, say, 1 kilometer away and you might stay there for a few hours. That on a very small scale is fission fusion. But what we also see is subgroups going like up to, say, 20 or 30 kilometers away and then staying there for a month. And so fission fusion just means groups splitting up and coming back together. But the scale at which you see this happens varies a lot. So for lions, like something we're really interested in is that this has been quite well described in the Serengeti, where actually everything's been quite well described in the Serengeti. But this is just a small part of, say, large carnivores ranges, particularly the lion, which exists across sub-Saharan Africa and in mostly semi-arid. So it's not a desert, but it looks a bit like a desert. And we're trying to look at this behavior in these areas.
Yeah, so most of what we think of as lion social behavior, sociality, comes from the Serengeti, where you have really big prides of, say, 20 female lions and get up to 20. Then the male lions will try and be resident with the female population. In the Serengeti, you can get a group of, I think the largest was 9 males.
For context, like in 20 years of studying lions in Kutsi Game Reserve, we've never seen more than 2 together.
That's incredible.
Ever. And I mean, they're born in litters, but the litters also only have 1 or 2. So it's not like it's just who you're born with and that those become your like male pals and you go out and capture some prides with them. But we've actually only seen 1 really negative direct interaction between males in the area. And that's like, again, in 20 years.
Serengeti, that's how it operates. The males it's competition between males for prides. And so if you're holding a pride as a male group, you're constantly having to defend it from other males.
Yeah.
And there's turnover. There's a lot of turnover of males. Some coalitions never manage to gain residence with the pride. Some never gain residence long enough to have offspring, where it sounds like in semi-arid systems, lions don't have to worry about that as much. Their worries are different.
That's so incredible.
Yeah.
Like, we're not seeing this on television or not even in The Lion King.
Don't get me started on The Lion King.
I actually love The Lion King.
I love The Lion King.
It's like a guilty pleasure.
There are no Lion Kings. They're egalitarians. There's not one individual who has priority access to mates or food.
Yeah.
So the Lion King depiction to me just kind of makes me cringe a little bit.
But I looked at what is probably the most extensive data set on lion dispersal, and something everyone said is no, the males, they leave their natal dispersal territory. And they had done a paper on 3 to 5 years of dispersal data a few years before, and they'd said this is the average dispersal distance. I then came in 10 years later, and these lions just came right back to where they were born.
Wow.
Like, they just like meandered around for a while, but if you have a long enough time series, it was not unusual for them to come right back to the territory they were born in. And I can't answer whether that's natural. That could be a factor of all sorts of things changing in the landscape for lions. But, you know, that's something people always say, oh, that would never happen. Simba would never come home. But it seems like sometimes
Simba
they do.
came home for you after all.
Yeah.
Wow.
And again, I think it's this variation between populations, because Lion King was based on the Serengeti population. It was known there at the time. And so in the Serengeti population, you don't see them coming back to their natal range. It's like it happens, but it's pretty rare. Versus in other areas, it doesn't seem like lions behave the same way across systems, which is really interesting.
Yeah, that is so cool, because now what I'm getting from you guys is that no single pride is a monolith. It's not like one single layout that all lions will have to follow. It seems there's so many factors going into how they stick together, how they don't stick together, how they travel and come back. We've talked about how different types of groups are formed and how, you know, they travel in different ways. But then would you see this as like, okay, they're social in different ways or not? Do you know what I mean?
I think it's all a spectrum. I think this is basically all we've learned. Like, I think the last 5 years in animal behavior, this has been a general movement, you know, in behavior, in where they go, in how they act and how they operate. Like, even fission fusion, we used to say some species were and some species weren't. I think what we see is all of it is a gradient, and it's just a gradient that allows you to respond to your changing environment. Because, I mean, especially these kind of systems, they're very dynamic. Food is ephemeral. It might be there one season, gone another.
Right.
And the food has legs as well. So
Yeah.
the food is literally moving as well. And so you have to be able to react to these scenarios. And I think having this flexibility in how they behave, it allows them to do, adapt from day to day and from season to season, but also to new areas. And I think that's where you get to see the kind of flexibility of the species.
Yeah.
The project that we're doing now is it's going to be comparing across some habitat types, but really getting into how do individuals in a group, what are they up to? Because up until now, it's been really difficult to study behaviors like cooperative hunting. It's hard to see lions. They're not easy to track. And usually you're just able to put like a GPS collar on one individual in pride. And technology has also limited what kind of data we can gather using this collar technology.
So what kind of data are you looking to collect for this project?
We are collecting a lot of data on where they're moving. The most exciting bit is that we are going to have every individual from a pride. We're going to be able to get data from them using high resolution collars, which I'll let Jen's kind of the more techie one of the two of us. So I'll let her talk a little bit more about what our collars actually are doing.
What's really cool is we're going to have simultaneous information, as Natalia said, on both what the lions are doing. We'll have that from audio, so we're going to have a continuous narration of what they're up to. We're also going to measure how much energy they're using. We can basically record acceleration, and this gives us a measure of their activity, what they're up to, and we'll also be able to look at location, and this is through GPS tracking.
So Jen and Natalia just mentioned that they are using accelerometry and biologging in their research. What is this exactly?
Measuring animal behavior in the wild is really, really hard. And one way researchers have been doing that is basically by attaching these tags on the animals. So it could be a ring around a bird or a collar around a carnivore. And basically from these, you could then measure the behavior of the animals more or less 24/7 throughout the day. There are two main kind of data types that you get from these tags. So one is GPS, and I guess everyone knows what a GPS is. It basically tells you where the tag is on the map. And then the other one is an accelerometer, which basically measures the acceleration of the tag, so the movement of the tag. And then with that, you could then get behaviors.
So for example, it would be possible to say if this animal is walking or is running?
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of like the Fitbit or the phone for us. So basically your phone also measures the steps you take just from an accelerometer. But of course, it's not that easy. So you can't just put a tag on an animal and know exactly what they're doing. A lot of researchers actually need to use a lot of machine learning based methods to basically turn the accelerometer data into actual behaviors.
Oh, that sounds crazy. But are there also some challenges with this approach?
Yes, of course. So because we're putting tags onto actual wild animals, it's really, really important to make sure the tags does not affect the natural behavior. Researchers would want to make the tags as small as possible, but of course that would then affect other things like, for example, the battery life or the amount of equipment you can fit into one tag.
It seems to be also a very nice tool to infer social lives of many wild species. Let's go back to Jen and Natalia.
And so then from that, we hope to be able to, say, really dive deep into what are they doing when they're doing cooperative activity like hunting, who's participating, how are they moving, how fast are they going, is one lion of the group usually the one that is ambushing, so one that goes first or stays behind. All of these types of questions that have been really difficult to get to, and that's just kind of one small part of the types of questions we can answer given this really rich data set that we hope to get.
Jen, why do we need these different types of data?
What we're really interested in is understanding, for example, where do animals roar? So this is where the acoustics come into it. But then you also need the GPS because you need to know not just that they were roaring, but also where did they do it and what time did they do it. So that's one of our questions. And then we're also trying to look at where these animals hunt. And if you just have a bunch of dots on the landscape, that's really difficult to tell what the animals are doing. But measuring their activity via acceleration, this allows us to look at when they were running, for example.
Natalia, tell us more about lion hunting behavior.
Sure. So like with most things lions, hopefully you're picking up on, it's highly variable.
Yay.
You get regions where, for example, in Serengeti, the females will hunt a lot. The males will scavenge more from the females and other species than in other. They'll still hunt things like buffalo. Versus in Kruger, South Africa, the male lions do a lot more of their own hunting, still on big things like buffalo. So lion hunting behavior can be really variable depending on what prey is there, what is the habitat like. So we're interested in figuring out what are they hunting and how are they hunting? When do they cooperate? When do they not cooperate? For example, lions in the Botswana study area that we have, you'll get a single female lion taking down an adult giraffe, which is a ridiculously hard task for a single lion, which if you had asked me, I don't know, 10 years ago, I would have said absolutely not. They would have to have a male or multiple females. But no, they're very versatile.
Oh, wow. How do lions share, actually, their meals? Because surely this one single lone lioness taking down an adult giraffe, maybe she doesn't want to share, but maybe she does?
Well, the instances that I have recorded of that, it's usually when she has younger cubs or like juveniles with her. And so they won't participate in the hunt necessarily, but then they'll come and eat. But typically if you have, say, adult females hunting, it is the thinking from the Serengeti is that if you participate in the hunt, then you share the food and then other pride members might come at a later time. But generally, if you take part in the hunt, you all share. So if you take down something like a zebra, say, then your pride mates are going to share if they helped. Or if you've taken a warthog, you might keep that for yourself because it's small and you need all of it.
And you can defend that like smaller carcasses, more or less.
Yeah, I mean, they'll growl and they'll defend it from their pride mates, but it's a really high risk to... Lions are big and they have big claws. And so one of the thinkings is that they're not going to push their luck, so to speak, and fight with their group members unless they really have to, because they can do a lot of damage, and that's then ultimately going to be detrimental to the group.
Okay.
I think it's one of the things we want to test, because this is an area where, like, when we're trying to cite the lions, what we'll often do is go to a known kill site, because all the other members will then come. Like, for example, we've seen males who are not usually associating will go to check on a giraffe carcass, and there'll be two males from opposing prides there. So when there is a big food source, it seems to be kind of like a truce. And I think if I understood correctly, it's like, if it's really too small to share and you already have it, then it's like, it's mine. But otherwise, it's kind of free for all.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So when does food sharing happen in animals?
Well, the first thing is that there needs to be enough food for several individuals. This may seem obvious, but it's not always easy for many animals.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. We really need to have an excess of food for food sharing to happen, right?
Absolutely. And then other variables play a role. For example, you are more likely to share food with your kin than with your non-kin group members. You are also more likely to share food when the food that you have collected rot very fast. So the quality of the food decreases very fast with time. Then you might as well let other individuals eat to avoid wasting food. And also, it is also maybe more important for lions. If the individuals with whom you are sharing food are very strong, they have also potentially lethal teeth, for example, you might as well let them eat than trying to fight with them and potentially be killed.
I see, that's super interesting. So basically, fighting is more costly than just sharing.
Yeah, if your opponents or if your partners are very strong there. Another thing is that food sharing also plays a huge role in social dynamics. So reciprocity is important, then you will usually reciprocate some food transfer. Also, food sharing in these cases is a good opportunity to get a good reputation in your group. But also, this can also help your group as a whole if it is important for your group to be as large as possible. So by group augmentation, then you can let all the other group members eat.
I see. And I guess as humans, we also do food sharing, right?
Yes, we do food sharing since a long time at an extraordinary level compared to other animals, due to the fact that we cook our food, so we have much more energy intake from the same amount of food compared to animals. By cooking food also, we need to gather together and to prepare the food, so this is actually a social act. From that, in humans, we saw a transformation of food sharing into meal sharing, where we share the same meal with social norms and so on.
I see. let's get back to Jen and Natalia to learn more about lions.
So we've talked about all these different data that you're aiming to collect. I guess looking into the future, I'm trying to envision, like, if you manage to get everything that you hope to get, how would you paint the big picture in the end? Like, how would they all come together to, like, really answer your big questions? Why are lions social?
Well, I think, if we manage to pull this off, we're going to have some really interesting pieces of the puzzle to be able to answer, how do lions cooperate together? How do lions get together in the first place to be able to cooperate? And I think looking forwards, what's this going to look like as the environment around them changes?
And how is it different? What would we expect lions in an arid environment to behave like versus lions in a very rich environment like the Serengeti? What does that gradient actually look like?
Mm-hmm. In a way, you have access to these huge data sets, 40 years, 20 years from different types of locations and areas. And so now you're like, okay, I have identified all the missing pieces of the puzzle. And so your project right now is to kind of plug those holes and actually make it make sense.
I think that's exactly it.
Yeah.
No one of us is going to answer the entire question of why are lions social and how did that happen? But we can at least get part of the way there, I hope.
Some of the gaps. There's just so much, there's a shocking amount of information that we still don't understand. And so hopefully it's to fill some of those gaps. And again, I think working as a team gives us a much better ability to do that.
And you mentioned cooperation. Would you say that this is like the biggest hallmark? Is that how you think of it? Or
Well, I think that's the thing. It's not do they, because they do, but when do they do it? Because not all of them do it, and not all of them do it all of the time. So when do they cooperate? When do they come together? How often do they come together? And how does that change? And why?
You hadn't mentioned it yet, but I happen to know that you also work alongside local populations in the area. So what is that like to really study lion prides in the Serengeti or wherever it is that you happen to be investigating them? What are the ethics?
Yeah, I mean, so to start with, I guess in Botswana, the situation is a little bit of a crossover because, yes, we work with an NGO there, but the NGO is almost exclusively the people from the local village.
Oh, nice.
But that's interesting because even within, we talk about maybe the local population, but that's made up of multiple stakeholders. So you might have the people who are working as trackers for the NGO with a research focus. Then you have subsistence farmers who might have some cattle or some goats, either for food or actually just to keep them because it's, seen as something you should acquire.
Right.
Exactly. Or then you might have actually farmers who don't even live in the local area, but they keep their cattle there. And then you have people who are employed in the region for other reasons, or you might be a teacher, or you might work with another department. So all of these people make up the local population, and the ways that you communicate and, the ways that you engage with them might be really, really different. And I think that it's something as researchers we're becoming more and more aware of. We need to understand this, and we need to be respectful of not just our perspectives, but all of the perspectives of all the different stakeholders who you might be working with. So I think that's one side of the ethical issues we face. And the other side is that we're doing a little bit more to the animals because we actively knock them out to, not forever, they're fine. And then we place a device on them. So we also, that's something that has to go through ethical review before we even consider going out there.
Of course.
But then additionally in country as well. And then you're like, okay, we're getting this information. How do we make sure that the country that we're collecting it in gets to share in the information? And so you have this kind of multi-step thing that process you have to go through when you're planning research.
That's one of the deeper questions that I'm curious about, because I can imagine, best case scenario, everyone is happy to gain more knowledge and get more data about the local lion population that they're living alongside. But I also wonder, have you ever come across any local groups, stakeholders who are actually not interested in the lions, actually not interested in having them around, and therefore not interested in having you around?
Yeah, I mean, of course. And, we faced things, especially when I first started there, because we sometimes help with the Department of Wildlife in dealing with what they term problem animal control, which is, it's a very loaded term in and of itself.
Right.
But, I would have to show up to collect when a lion had been shot, and you show up and they kind of dump a skin in your arms. They're like, go take your lion away. It's like, it's not my lion. I didn't tell it to do it. Oh, no. Yeah, so we recently actually did a social sciences survey in the communal land. So we went out and did a survey. And what was really interesting was that people kind of unanimously said they valued the wildlife. They really believed in the value of lions and leopards, and they want them around for their future generations. But almost like 95% of them want them back inside the park. They just don't want them outside the park. And
Right.
I think there's a point where you have to say, it's their land. If that's what they want, how can we work together for these aims? Like, we all want a stable and healthy population because we want them there for the long run.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, what that looks like can be really different. And you've really got to listen to what the people in the area want. Otherwise, you're just pushing different views
Right.
and no one gets to move forward.
Okay, so now that we're getting a bit more personal, I think the burning question is, why lions? For both of you, like, why lions in the first place? Like, why you as a scientist want to go into the wild and look at lions?
When I started my PhD, I was reading up on social species, and then also I was always really interested in animal cognition.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the studies had been done on species like apes or dolphins or wolves. But there is a hypothesis that being social is more challenging than not being social. So you don't only have to worry about succeeding in your environment, but you have to deal with social relationships. And something about that placed pressure on these species to evolve greater cognitive abilities. So like chimpanzees and using tools. But what hadn't been done at that point was to compare a social species with a non-social species and see, well, are they just better at social tasks? Are they better overall? Is there actually a difference? Because the support for this idea was that social species are good at things, but that doesn't necessarily say that they're better.
Mm-hmm.
And so lions offer a really cool model system to look at that because they have close relatives. So the tigers and jaguars and leopards, they all share a common ancestor. And so it's an opportunity to compare closely related social species to non-social species and try and get at this question of, do they differ cognitively? I found that lions did better at solving novel problems than their asocial cousins, but it's still ongoing.
Did you give them puzzles?
I did. I gave them a puzzle box. I gave them cooperative puzzle boxes and individual puzzle boxes, and then did different measures of cognition from it. It was really fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess my story is a little bit different. I think how I got into it, why I would want to work with lions in the first place, and then why I kept working with lions are all a bit different. So I actually fell into lion research. I had never done anything large carnivore related, or in fact anything to do with spatial ecology, which is what I now specialize in. But I got a call from some people I'd met at the University of Zurich when I had applied for a PhD years ago, saying that there was an NGO in Botswana who were looking for someone to build a database to house some of their data. And I thought, well, that sounds very cool. And I will have to admit, I was just like, lions sound cool. Databases are not cool, but this is what I know how to do. So I went over there and helped kind of manage their data for a year. And so I guess that's why I ended up studying lions immediately. And then why I stayed, I think, is just because, I mean, the field site's really a very, very special place. And I am really privileged to spend a lot of time with the local trackers in the area, camping out. And it is really hard not to get involved and not to really fall in love with the place. And so kind of bit by bit, I've been drawn more and more into that program. And now I'm actually head of research there. And this is probably something I intend to, spend quite a lot of my time doing. I mean, I've always loved cats, but I think I would have been happy with like a domestic cat.
What is the most challenging thing that you actually have to face as a fieldwork researcher? Because if you want to look at lions, you have to get out there, you have to get involved, you have to really get your hands dirty. But I think for lots of people that can also be really rewarding. So I guess my question is like twofold. Like, what is the most difficult and challenging thing that you have to face? But also, what is like the most rewarding thing that you think you get out of this, work?
I guess from my perspective, the challenge can be summarized a little bit as fieldwork hits differently when you're older. So, in my early 20s, I lived in a rainforest in Costa Rica for 18 months, and that was fine. I lived in a hammock on top of mud for 18 months, and I was okay. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we could talk about that in some ways, not being able to shower when you want to, not being able to charge phones when you want to. Or in fact, when I first got there, we didn't have phone signal. Mm-hmm. We didn't have internet. So, the whole time you're there, you couldn't contact the outside world. And those are challenges on the short term. I think long term, it's just, as you get older, you do want to be able to get back to see your parents, see your family, or maintaining relationships. people don't necessarily think about what fieldwork does to that, because you're balancing work requirements and then you're also maybe away for 50-60% of the year. And so what little time you have back can be quite pressured. I mean, I love what I do and I've obviously continued to do it, but it is a challenge as well. You have to be ready for the realities of what that looks like.
For example, our car broke down how many times?
I don't think we want to count.
We lost track. And so on the way to the field site, you don't have a cell signal. You're in the middle of nowhere. You're driving to this amazing landscape where you're going to see lions, which I think is probably what keeps us going. But when you break down on the side of the road, close to dark, the sun is setting, you have no way to get help. It's a bit stressful. Luckily, the people in all of the countries where we work are lovely. And every single time that's happened, somebody has pulled over to the side of the road to help us. So it's always worked out in the end. But you do have to prepare for the stresses of just working in really remote areas. And it's not necessarily always the animals that you're going to be worried about.
Yeah.
And food. I mean, I grew up in London and I love my food. When we're abroad, there's like, well, should we go to the same restaurant we've been going to for 6 years? Now, the one restaurant. And one restaurant actually doesn't really have any choice. But, you know, you get used to that. But sometimes I'm like, I just want a fresh salad.
Well, on top of that, sometimes you don't have refrigeration.
We have a car fridge, but it sometimes works. It sometimes doesn't work.
Yeah.
But these are all small things. I feel like these are things that they're a momentary consideration. But yeah, you do have to think about the isolation. Is that something, because something about it can be really enjoyable. You get to switch off from all the social media. It takes a lot of pressure off. And I mean, for me, the routine is great. I'm someone who struggles to be, despite having taken a lot of jobs that involve being really organized, I am personally not super organized and I need structure. So it's great. You get up when the sun gets up. You do the same thing every day, and that's fantastic. But other people would be going stir crazy in a remote camp where they can't leave. So you've just got to weigh up whether this is the type of thing that you think you'd enjoy.
Yeah. And if you do enjoy it, be aware that you might love being in the field, but it does come at a personal price of the ability to maintain relationship.
So to end on a really high note, I would ask both of you to give a pep talk to future academics. For just imagine, you know, one of the listeners listening to this podcast right now is really excited by, you know, what you guys have talked about, and they really want to get into this. What would be your advice, and, you know, what would be the pep talk that, you know, okay, this is what you got to do, go on.
So one thing that I wish I had known is that there are a lot of options. If you're interested in field work or research, it doesn't have to just be go to university, get your master, get your PhD. You can do that route, but there's also, you can work for NGOs, you can work for government organizations. There's lots of routes to be able to be in the field doing research. So my advice would be to look into all of those routes, keep your options open, and there will be a lot of rejection, so don't let it discourage you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I would really agree with that. What I was going to say, I think, is just remember there's not just one route to get there. And I think even if you focus in narrowly on just academia, you know, you don't need to have been a wildlife scientist from the start. Think about what skills you might want. And again, I think it makes you more flexible in the future if you focus on what interests you and then look at the fields you can apply it to. But again, I would really agree that academia and university research is only one very small part of, say, the conservation field, or even wildlife research. A lot of it is very management focused. You know, I got a job straight out of undergrad doing management of conservation projects. And despite the fact I'm now back in a more academic role, those skills were incredibly valuable to me. You know, I think people come from a lot of different backgrounds and people have different strengths, and there's a home for all of them. So, yeah. Don't be discouraged.
Don't be discouraged, and you don't have to decide. It's not like you have to be an undergrad and decide this is what you want to do. You have time to switch, and there are many different options.
Yeah. I think that's one of the fears, I think, because when you're in high school, when you're just finishing undergrad, you feel like you have to decide on one thing and that's your forever thing. And that's not true. You know, that you have so many opportunities to just reinvent yourself over and over as a human being, as a researcher, as a not researcher, as someone who's interested in conservation or not. Well, thank you so much for your time today, and really, I'm so grateful that you're both here, and I hope that our listeners will get a different view of what fieldwork is like and what working with collective behavior is like and what lions are about. So thank you so much, and this has been In the Swarm. Stay tuned for next time. Bye!